Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice.
The juice is loose once again, 36 years later. So it's time for us to take a deep dive into the world of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice and rank all the characters from good to evil.
What the f?
And as usual, we'll be starting with the most pure-hearted character and working our way down to the most evil. These characters are the good. And starting off in the great beyond, we have Astrid's departed father, Richard Dietz, taking the gold medal of good. He's not the only father in this universe to die at sea, but Richard was the more favorable by a decent margin. He died in a tragic boating accident while protesting for climate justice, which is already a clear sign that he's willing to dedicate time to causes much bigger than himself. But what really boosts him up to the top spot is his relationship with his daughter Astrid. Usually, goth kids in fiction are notorious for having parents who don't understand them, or at least parents who they feel don't understand them. But not so with Richard. He always supported and loved Astrid through everything, with the two even planning to travel the world to see the scariest places they could think of. Even in literal death, when Astrid is scammed into trading places with a murderer in the afterlife, Richard abandons his post and chases after her, showing that even death won't stop him from being a top-tier dad. And taking a very close second place is Astrid's other parents, her alleged mother, Lydia Dietz, who takes the silver medal of good. This gothic icon is one of the overarching main characters of the series, with a special gift that allows her to see ghosts, which thankfully she uses solely for good. In the first movie, she befriended the Maitland couple and helped them find peace in their new place of haunting. Ironically, despite her aesthetic and supernatural abilities, this little gas membrane cosplayer is the closest thing to a somewhat normal person in her family. And at the end of the day, she really is a sweetheart, which is why it's nice to see how she's made it in the sequel, now using her abilities as a spirit medium to host her own TV show. This way of life allows her to both help innocent people who are afraid of ghosts haunting them, and to make a pretty comfortable living for her family. Despite her daughter constantly belittling her career, Lydia always does her best to support her and really does try to bond with her. The worst we could say about her is that she is gullible. She gets manipulated by Beetlejuice in the first movie, which is understandable given that she was just a kid, and in the sequel, she falls victim to gold-digging Rory. That gullible nature often gets herself and the people around her into trouble, but she'll fight tooth and nail to protect them at the end of the day. Next, our bronze medal of good has to go to Father Damien. As minor of a character as this guy is, we just had to give him a shout out. He's the one who holds the funeral for Charles Dietz and later officiates the wedding of Rory and Lydia, or at least he would have if Rory hadn't shown his true colors. There's not much to say about Damien, save for the fact that he's a decent Christian man who does what he can to help his community feel safe and comfortable in hard times. Like mother, like daughter, next up is Astrid Dietz. As the daughter of the famous Lydia Dietz, Astrid is often teased for her relationship with her TV host mother, though thankfully, being played by Jenna Ortega, she's always ready for a biting clapback. Right off the bat, Astrid is a rebellious, sarcastic teenager. She screens her mom's calls whenever she can, treats adults with minimal respect, and won't hold back from saying how she really feels. But even considering her sarcasm, that last trait isn't a bad one, considering she's one of the first people to see through Rory's nice guy charade, instantly giving her and the audience something to relate over because, oh my god, this guy is such an absolute sham of a human being. For now, as sarcastic as Astrid is, that's really the worst we can say about her. She's just a kid trying to find her way in the world. At the end of the movie, when she realizes that she shares her mother's specter spotting abilities, she apologizes for doubting her all those years, and ultimately helps save her from being wed to Rory or Beetlejuice, both of which would have been really sucky fates to have. And rounding out our good section, we have the legendary actor Wolf Jackson. He's one of the few literal souls brave enough to keep the afterlife in check, safe from the ruckuses caused by criminals like Beetlejuice and flesh bags like Lydia Dietz. Despite getting very much into his role as the character, Wolf actually does acknowledge that he's an actor, and when his assistant, Janet, points this out to him, he actually thanks her sincerely. A guy who can respect his employees already earns a lot of points, and while his methods can be extreme, the fact that he's also helping to keep the afterlife in order doesn't hurt his case either. But with that said, we've reached the end of our full-on good guys section. It's time to get into more questionable characters. These characters fall in the gray area, and while he only really has half a role in the movie, the shark-inflicted death of Charles Dietz is what kicks off the whole film, so we have to give him a mention. To put it simply, the man is a sharp investor. He sees potential money-making in a lot of things, such as houses he bought on a whim without asking his wife. He's an opportunist, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there is something wrong with the way he treats Lydia. While he isn't abusive by any measuring stick, he can definitely be cold and dismissive, often unwilling to make time to listen to what she has to say.
I saw some ghosts.
He isn't particularly a bad guy, but he always had his head deeper in his work than in his family's life. Of course, now his head is deep in a shark, which I imagine is way less pleasant than the birdwatching trip he had his heart set on. So, rest in peace. Up next is the world's most dedicated realtor, Jane Butterfield. Ever since her first appearance in the original movie, she's been determined to sell the infamous ghost house, even before it became a ghost house. Her reason for this? That's a great question, actually. I guess there are worse things you could be in a lighthearted horror flick than a nosy realtor, but Jane is still a pushy nuisance who puts her career above anything else. Heck, even after Charles' death in the sequel, this girl was still determined to get that house sold. I mean, you gotta respect the hustle, even if you respect, like, literally nothing else. But now it's time to get to that curly-haired icon who's synonymous with the franchise. That's right, we're talking about Danny DeVito. Okay, I know he does practically nothing in the movie. He just serves as a janitor who gives people directions in the afterlife, and indirectly shows off Dolores' soul-sucking powers by, dying to them. There isn't much of a moral dispute to be had, but you just can't give Danny DeVito a cameo and expect me not to mention it. But now it's time to talk about one of the more infamous characters, Lydia's mother, Delia Dietz. While Lydia's dad was a bit distant, her stepmother is an outright narcissist, and has been since day one. This lady is obsessed with art. More specifically, she's obsessed with her own art, which earns her the Pride Center Medal quite easily. Even her husband's death is viewed as an opportunity for her, as while she did genuinely love Charles and deeply mourned his death, she took it as an opportunity to turn their home into a poetic display of grief or whatever. She's a character who gives off a lot of "I want to speak to your manager" vibes, since even being in the afterlife itself doesn't stop her from the classic "do you know who my husband is" argument Karens of the world just love to use. That said, she's not all bad. Like Astrid, she sees through Rory for the scoundrel he is, to the point where she discourages Lydia from marrying her, and in a surprising turn of events, she encourages her to take her life back from Beetlejuice. Of course, she also enlists Beetlejuice's help to get back to find Charles, which kinda loses her some more points. And she was just so close. Nearing the end of our gray section, we have the legendary Bob. One of those weird shrunken head guys from the first movie, Bob is Beetlejuice's trusted second in command. Despite the latter having zero regard for his well-being, even recruiting him as a body double to follow him around so that if Dolores finds them, she'll suck his soul instead of Beetlejuice's. Beetlejuice explains this directly, and while we do commend Bob's loyalty, we also have to mention his stupidity in being willing to do this, a choice that earns him the Darwin Center Medal. But really though, Bob is loyal to a fault. Even when he's being interrogated both by Wolf Jackson and Dolores herself, he refuses to give up Beetlejuice's location or anything, and that choice ends up losing him his soul. It's good for him to be such a loyal assistant, but when the guy he's assisting is Beetlejuice, there's only so much credit we can give him. And closing out the gray area, we have the sandworms, one of the many kinds of strange creatures you might encounter in the afterlife. If you do encounter them, make sure that encounter doesn't last long, because these guys don't care if you're a protagonist or an antagonist, they'll just eat you anyway. And that tendency earns them the Gluttony Center Medal. And you'd think it would earn them a spot in the bad category, but honestly, what else are they gonna do? Even in the afterlife, a big boy's gotta eat. But now it brings us to the section that you've all been waiting for. These are the most truly diabolical characters, the bad and the evil. And narrowly missing out the podium of evil is the infamous Rory. Beetlejuice treated us to 3 new villains to spice things up alongside the Juice himself. And while Rory is the least evil of those, don't go thinking that means he's a decent guy by any means. Like Astrid, we saw through this guy's yoga guru persona right away. He takes every possible opportunity to manipulate Lydia, usually to make her stuff into his stuff. I mean, the man proposed to Lydia at her father's wake. How many different layers of insensitive and delusional do you have to be to do that? Well, none, as it turns out. You just have to be really, really greedy. See, Jane would have been a shoo-in for the Greed Center Medal, but Rory knocks her out of the park. As he was forced to reveal in the movie's final act, Rory only wanted to marry Lydia for her money, revealing that not only did he never believe in ghosts, but that he never even lost a spouse. The fact that he met her at a widow's retreat was nothing more than an attempt to hook her while she was most vulnerable, so he could take as much money as possible. But the worst part of all, he replaced all the candy for the trick-or-treaters with carrot sticks. This man is a monster, and he still still somehow isn't in the bottom 3, but it's not for a lack of trying. Resident Hallmark-coded double murderer Jeremy Fraser takes the bronze medal of evil. If this sudden romance arc was too sweet for your senses, worry not. While Astrid and Jeremy might initially seem like a match made in heaven, it's eventually revealed that Jeremy is a ghost who died falling out of his treehouse, which is just bad luck, right? Well, no, it's actually karma. The reason Jeremy fell out of that treehouse was because he was fleeing the police, who showed up after Jeremy brutally murdered his parents. This is a really creative way of showing that Astrid can see ghosts like her mother, and also a great way of showing that Jeremy is a scumbag who only strung Astrid along so he could swap places with her, tricking her into believing she could see her father again if she helped him, which was technically true, I guess. He managed to get her to switch places with her, leaving her in the afterlife while he'd be able to return to the living world. Thankfully, at the very last moment, Beetlejuice was there to send this guy to hell where he belongs, and nobody there is gonna fall for his treehouse sweet talking. But now, without further ado, it's time to get to the main man himself. The silver medal of evil has to go to Beetlejuice. This guy is an absolute icon, and I mean that in the worst way possible.
Hey, hermano. Yeah, there you go.
First things first, he is a full-on predator. In the first movie, when the Maitlands meet him inside of their model of the town, he wastes no time in harassing Barbara. But his being a predator goes one step further. In the new movie, it's revealed that he was, in fact, a human being once, living as a grave robber during the Black Plague. This means that this hundreds of years old demon is, hundreds of years old, and he does have memories of his human life. So if anyone out there wanted to defend him trying to marry a 15-year-old Lydia Dietz, I think your argument just got squashed. He's a sleaze in every sense of the word, which earns him the Lust Sinner medal. I guess technically you could say that Beetlejuice is capable of being helpful, if you give him something in return, that is. In the second movie, he does help Lydia rescue her daughter and dish out some justice against both Rory and Jeremy, but that was all so he could marry her and return to the living world. And that's not even getting into his love for body horror, using his employees for inhuman shields, and being willing to do quite literally anything for sick pleasure. Well, that is, except having his soul sucked out by a fellow demon. But first, this video is brought to you by Wicked Binge channel memberships. You can gain access to our videos early before anyone else, plus get members-only emojis and loyalty badges by supporting the channel through a membership. But finally, the gold medal of evil has to go to Dolores. While Beetlejuice was busy robbing graves, he met the beautiful and deadly Dolores, who happened to be involved with a soul-sucking death cult. In order to gain immortality, she planned to kill Beetlejuice and suck out his soul, as she does with plenty of other afterlife creatures throughout the movie. Like Beetlejuice, she's more than willing to trick others into falling in love with her to reach her goals. But what makes her more evil? Well, honestly, not too much. I think there's a case to be made that Beetlejuice is just as bad as she is, but in his case, you could argue that he's at least occasionally helpful to others. Even if it is only for his own means, at the end of the day, he still technically has some good deeds under his belt. Dolores will suck out the souls of anyone she comes into contact with, and it's all for the sake of her own immortality, which really, what is she even gonna do with that? Suck out more souls? These two were made for each other, but as Beetlejuice himself said, even he has some lines that he won't cross. And being that very line herself, Dolores has to take the gold medal of evil.